How I Left Home, or How a Good Girl Went Bad, Part 1. My mother said it all started with the nuns. Of course, it's 60 years ago now, so there is the issue of memory. But I can still hear my mother's words. I hold Mother Grazia responsible for you getting pregnant. The thought was so absurd, what could I say? At that time, I was overwhelmed with rage and shame. I had no experience finding words for feelings that enormous. I wanted to defend Mother Grazia. She became Sister Suzanne when the nuns got out of their habits and off their high horses. She was on faculty at all-female Marymount College in Quebec City, where I did my first 2 years of university because I won a scholarship, but really because my parents thought I wasn't ready for a large Montreal coeducational campus. Marymount was run by American nuns, quasi-missionaries to the minority English Catholic population of Quebec City. In those days, the college had established the first 2 years of courses. The nuns played baseball after Mass on Sundays, white sneakers flashing under their black robes as they stole bases. These nuns were college graduates, widely read for women who had chosen to marry God. Mother Grazia only offered topics for discourse, being interested in what we young women had to say. She was the first person to glimpse the woman I was going to become. So in a way, I do understand what my mother meant. Mother Grazia was midwife to my adult self, and the first event of my adult life was pregnancy. Myself, I'd say it started with my sister Julia. She had turned 18, I was 20. We were still closer to adolescence than adulthood. Those days, growing up in the suburbs in a big Catholic family, we were ignorant of the world. Julia was a bit of a firecracker. I was more like a searchlight. That year, my parents decided it was time for the 3 oldest kids to sit down to Sunday evening meal with them and practice dinner conversation, leaving the 6 little ones to fend for themselves. I can't remember a single topic before the night Julia said, "Well, I think eating fish on Fridays is stupid. Going to hell because of a mouthful of meat, how dumb." I imagine now that we must have been able to hear that pin drop. All I can recall is that both Mom and Dad let this blasphemous thought exist in the space around the dining room table without annihilating it. Maybe one of them said, "You might have a point there," or "That might be worth thinking about." I was astounded by the revelation that there was place in this family to examine the tenets of the Catholic faith. It was a few weeks later that I summoned the courage to raise the incendiary topic on my own mind. I prefaced it by calling up the fish issue, which still hung in the air. In a voice less assured than Julia's, I began, like she said, some things about the church might be, stupid. For example, what about premarital sex being a mortal sin? Whatever happened next is gone to memory. Both that night and the next 4 days. What I do recall is the end of the week, when I got home from class. My father coming into my room, which he never did. I can still hear his words, "You and I are going over to have a conversation with your boyfriend." My boyfriend? Well, he was 21 years old, so actually a man. Jim Hassinger and I met at Loyola College, which had opened its doors to female students in 1964, the previous year. I had transferred from Marymount in my 3rd year to an honors English BA program. Most of the Loyola students had been in the boys' educational system since grade 1. I remember walking past clusters of them on campus that first day of the fall term. They were sharing stories of summer adventures. Rumbling voices stopped dead, a collective deer in the headlights look as I went by. I imagine it was the same for the other 6 female students. The years of single-gender education had not prepared these boy men for the social revolution. I chose Jim from this assemblage of available males because his creativity thrilled me. Poet, playwright, director, guitar player, folk singer. He had graduated summa cum laude the previous year and taken the job of teacher's assistant in Loyola's English department. My brother Peter, a year ahead of me, had been in the play Exit Pursued by a Bear, written and directed by Jim. My second year at Loyola, I played Cassandra in the Greek tragedy The Trojan Women. Jim's bony elbows inside the leather patches of his tweed jacket startled a bodily rush I had no idea was lust. I had discovered self-pleasuring early on, but the sensations had never been attached to the male gender. The thought came into my schoolgirl brain, God must have made my body for this. We were a large Catholic family living in Dorval, a suburb of Montreal. Being eldest daughter, my role as good girl was one I took seriously. I began to research the staggering question, is it possible the Catholic Church has got this wrong? It was the 60s. The issue of birth control was about to pass from the domain of celibate pope and black-robed priests to the white coats of family doctor and pharmacist. I wondered, if babies were not an issue, would God be saying pleasure is a way of worship? I was also asking, was anyone talking about this? I attended a panel at Loyola College on the topic of Catholicism and sexuality. Wary of the dangers of stirring up libido, the Jesuit organizers managed to have the evening come to a close without a single use of the word sex. How did they pull that off? In my quest for answers, I visited my youngest aunt and uncle, Phyllis and Bob. They straddled my parents and my own generation and had had 7 babies by then, so I knew they knew about the topic at hand. But they also had curious, open minds. They were kind. They asked me frank questions like, what drew me to this young man I was considering having sexual relations with? It's a mark of where I was on the path to self-knowledge that I couldn't answer them. Now, of course, I know what had happened. I had fallen in love with Jim's muse. My parents managed to have 9 children themselves while raising us in a vacuum about sexuality. That was what good parents did in those days. While there must have been literature on the subject in the mid-60s, none was available to me. The closest source I could find was CBC, our family's one choice for radio and television at the time. My mother and I watched a production of Eloise and Abelard on CBC Playhouse soon after I had opened Pandora's box at the dining room table. Now, this is the story of a romantic liaison between a theologian and a young female scholar in the 12th century, with the devastating outcomes of pregnancy, castration, and banishment to the nunnery. What stays with me to this day is how my mother was moved, not shocked, moved by this story. At the same time, she stood by my father in what felt like a campaign to shame me out of my search for the answer to the question, what does God think about sex? My parents. My mother was the middle child of a creative, close-knit Irish-Scottish family with 7 children. Her own mother was a fiery, opinionated woman, her father a gentle placator. Mum birthed 9 babies, fed 11 people 3 meals a day, kept us in clothes and shoes that fit, and managed to keep every bathroom supplied with toothpaste and toilet paper. She was also a prolific, intelligent reader. If she had been born a generation later, she could have been an English prof. Or that woman at the front desk of any office, the office you know would spiral into chaos if she decided not to come into work that day. My father was third in an athletic, achievement-focused family of 9, with a larger-than-life Francophone-Anglophone father, a tender-hearted Australian mother. Dad chose medicine, became world-renowned as a pulmonary specialist, while sitting as president of our school board, where he fought for quality English education for decades. Mum was steady, reliable, and with 3 little ones in diapers at times, mostly emotionally unavailable. Dad was dedicated, funny, remote. They were also, as I see now, radical Catholics, more interested in caring for the poor than in the lofty issues of dogma and the soul. Among their closest Catholic friends were Tony Walsh, a lay apostolate, who dedicated his life to the homeless, and Daniel Berrigan, an American Jesuit, who went to prison for burning draft cards and spilling blood on nuclear warheads. Back to Friday night and my father in my room. Sick with dread, I accompanied him to Jim's apartment. Dad's goal was to convince us it was immoral to have sexual relations outside the bounds of sanctified union. His most forceful point, if this was acceptable behavior, it would be common practice. It touches me now to think that this grown man, who had earned a medical degree, served in the army in World War II, was president of the school board, believed that it was only married people who were having sex. Things heated up that night. When Dad saw that he was failing in his attempt to outsmart my not-yet lover, my father said, "Let's go, Marianne." I replied, "I'll take the bus home." I realized now that my father at that point was likely conjuring up the image of the two of us ripping off one another's clothes the minute the door was closed on him. Far from it. We sat holding hands, trying to find common footing on a path that was now less like a lover's romp, more like a battlefield. What happens next still amazes me. My Uncle Bob called my boyfriend's place. How he found the phone number, I'll never know. My parents certainly did not have it. My uncle and Aunt Phyllis were at my parents' home, which was unimaginable on a Friday night. Between them, they had 16 children. There was no such thing as spontaneous socializing for parents like these. They must have been there to talk about me. In any case, my uncle called to say that my father had arrived home totally distraught. My uncle asked in a kindly voice, would I please come home? Bewildered, I explained that the next bus wasn't for 25 minutes. It had never occurred to me, as it obviously had to my parents and uncle, that I might stay over at my boyfriend's. I still knew who I was, despite the chaos of it all. I was a dutiful daughter doing my best to find my place in the scary territory between safely established beliefs and dangerous new ones.